So here's a wild question for you. What if a janitor actually understood money better than some high-flying Harvard-educated executive? All right, let's actually look at this because it's a true story. On one hand, you've got Ronald Reed, a janitor, a gas station attendant. This guy quietly built up an $8 million fortune just by being patient, saving, and investing. Then, on the other hand, you have Richard Fuscone, Harvard education, top exec at Merrill Lynch, and he went bankrupt, totally wiped out by massive debt. I mean, how does that even happen? Well, the answer to that puzzle is exactly what we're going to unpack today. It all comes from this brilliant book by Morgan Housel called The Psychology of Money. And right at the heart of it is this one single idea that pretty much flips everything you think you know about finance on its head. It turns out, doing well with money, it has very little to do with how smart you are. It has everything to do with how you behave. It's not rocket science, it's a soft skill. Okay, so let's jump into our first big concept, which is called why no one's crazy. And this is huge. It's all about how your own personal history, your life experiences, literally shape how you think about money, even if your choices look totally nuts to somebody else. I mean, this idea can really change how you see things. Just think about it for a second. Everything you've personally experienced with money, it's just this tiny, tiny sliver of all the financial history in the world. But that little sliver, it makes up something like 80% of how you think the entire system works. That's wild. And here's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Let's say you were born in 1970. That means during your most formative years, your teens and 20s, you saw the stock market just explode. It went up like 10 times. So the lesson you learned was pretty simple. Stocks are awesome, they go up. But what if you were born just a decade earlier in the 1960s? Well, during those same years, you wouldn't be watching stocks soar, you'd be watching inflation triple prices. So your lesson was totally different. Money loses its value, you gotta be careful. See? It's the same world, but two completely different realities. Neither of these people is crazy. They're just a product of their own unique experience. Okay, so our personal experiences shape how we think. But what about all the stuff that's completely out of our control? Well, that leads us right into our next big idea, the lottery of life. This is where we talk about the massive, and I mean massive roles of luck and its evil twin, risk. Everyone knows Bill Gates is a genius, right? But what we don't always talk about is the huge dose of luck in his story. Get this, back in 1968, he just happened to go to a high school called Lakeside. It was one of the only high schools on the entire planet that had a computer. Gates himself even said, if there had been no Lakeside, there would have been no Microsoft. Wow. The odds of that happening, a high school kid in '68 getting to use a computer, literally 1 in a million. An unbelievable head start. But here's the thing. At that same school, he had a best friend named Kent Evans. And by all accounts, Kent was just as smart, just as driven. And this is where the story takes a tragic turn. This is the flip side of that lottery. The odds of Kent Evans dying in a mountaineering accident before he even graduated, also about 1 in a million. See that? The exact same level of insane improbability. One was incredible luck, the other was devastating risk. It's the very same force, just pointed in opposite directions. And Bill Gates gets this. He once said, "Success is a lousy teacher. It seduces smart people into thinking they can't lose." And that's really the point here. We have to respect both sides of that coin, luck and risk. You just can't focus on one and pretend the other doesn't exist. This idea of risk leads us perfectly into our third section, which is all about that internal battle we all face with greed. It's called when more isn't enough. And really, it's about the danger of always, always moving the goalposts. There's this amazing story about the author Joseph Heller. He was at a party thrown by some billionaire, and someone points out that the host made more money in a single day than Heller's famous book Catch-22 had made in its entire history. And Heller's reply was just perfect. He said, "Yes, but I have something he will never have. Enough." And you see this play out in real life with guys like Rajat Gupta, CEO of McKinsey, had $100 million, and Bernie Madoff, who, believe it or not, had a super successful, legitimate business on the side. These guys had everything. They had made it, but they risked it all. For what? For something they didn't have and absolutely did not need. Just more. And that's the psychological trap, right? First, you get a taste of more wealth, more prestige. Then, your ambition starts to grow faster than your sense of satisfaction. The goalpost just keeps moving further and further away. And before you know it, you're risking the things you actually have and need for things you don't have and don't need. It's a game that is impossible to win. So, okay, if chasing more is a trap, then what is the actual secret to building wealth? Well, that brings us to our final and maybe most powerful section. The secret is time. And this is all about the truly mind-bending power of compounding. Whenever you talk about building serious wealth, one name is always at the top of the list, Warren Buffett. And we all think his skill is investing, and he's great at it, for sure. But his real secret weapon? It's not some crazy algorithm. It's just time. Okay, get ready for this number, because it's almost hard to wrap your head around. Out of Warren Buffett's entire net worth, a mind-blowing $81.5 billion of it was earned after he was old enough for Social Security. Let that sink in. His massive fortune didn't come from a few spectacular years. It came from the slow, patient, and just unstoppable power of time and compounding. Let me show you what I mean with this comparison. You've got Jim Simons, this legendary hedge fund manager. His annual returns, an incredible 66%. I mean, that just blows Buffett's 22% out of the water. So I gotta ask, who's the better investor? Looking at those numbers, you'd have to say Simons, right? So why is Warren Buffett still about 75% richer? Well, the answer is surprisingly simple. Jim Simons didn't really find his investing groove until he was 50. Warren Buffett? He started investing when he was 10 years old. That 75-year head start, that massive runway for his money to compound, that's the superpower. And no amount of short-term genius can ever compete with that. And that brings everything full circle, right back to our main point. The biggest takeaway here is that financial success is, at its core, a soft skill. How you behave, your patience, being humble enough to acknowledge luck and risk, knowing when you have enough, all of that is way, way more important than how many formulas you know or what school you went to. So, if we accept that success with money is really just a soft skill, then that leaves us with one final question to think about. A question for you, personally. What's one behavior that you can work on improving?